Welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, the podcast that explores what it takes to be well in a busy world. With self-care strategies from Chinese medicine, functional medicine, Ayurveda, neuroscience, and beyond. I'm your host, Brody Welch, a licensed acupuncturist and transformation catalyst, here to support you on your journey of health, happiness, and personal evolution. Welcome to today's show. As a clinician and a coach, I often hear from people, especially when they're stressed out or really overwhelmed, comments like, I should probably cut back on my drinking. Most of the time, these people are dealing with factors like loneliness, just stress at work or in their families, and are leaning hard into something that they know will help them feel better in the short term. They know that they want to cut back. After all, they know it's not a secret that alcohol can be an addictive substance, but they might be hesitant to mention it to people in their circle of support because they don't want to be branded as being addicted or being an addict, having a problem. Yet they clearly know that they're dealing with a substance that puts them on a slippery slope, and maybe they have a history of addiction in their families. They don't want to go there. And so there's this dichotomy of like our culture that looks at addiction as a disease, and looks at people who deal with addiction as something that is their identity as an addict. And in 12-step programs, really frequently, it reinforces the idea that if once an addict, always an addict. There is another way of looking at addiction, and my guest today is going to help us unpack it. Michelle Dunbar is the co-author of The Freedom Model for Addictions, Escape the Treatment and Recovery Trap, and The Freedom Model for the Family. She's also executive director of the Baldwin Research Institute, Incorporated, and the Saint Jude Retreats, not-for-profit research organizations with the mission to change the way people with substance use problems are helped worldwide. Michelle's been helping people move beyond addiction for over 30 years. Michelle Dunbar, welcome to A Healthy Curiosity, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Brody.
First off, what are we talking about with the word addiction? What does it mean in this context?
Well, it means that it's the actual definition of addiction is a love for something, right? It's something that you feel you can't live without. And that's really what addiction is. It's you develop a strong preference for a certain behavior or a certain substance based on what you feel it does for you. It's a lot like falling in love. You know, if you fall in love, and initially the love affair is you feel like you can't live without this person. You feel like everything about this person is perfect and wonderful. And just like falling in love with a person, and over time, you begin to see the drawbacks of that relationship. And the same thing happens with substances, where sometimes your love affair with substances seems to go sour, but you keep trying to get what you wanted to get from it initially. And that's when we see people that think they're struggling with an addiction. It's a love-hate relationship they develop with the substance or with the behavior.
Okay, so something that you feel like you can't live without, different than like, I don't feel like I can live without my cat. Like I'm not addicted to my cat, but the difference there is this love-hate relationship that develops.
Yes. It's when people, first of all, our culture makes people believe that substances can do certain things for us. So it makes them that much more alluring. We kind of put them on a pedestal. And that's why, like during the pandemic, people are talking about, turning to alcohol and other substances is trying to cope because they feel like it'll do something to help them. And unfortunately, substances don't have the powers to do that. And that's where, people develop this love-hate relationship because they're trying desperately to feel better, to feel as if they're not alone, to feel as if that things are going to get better, to improve their mood and their outlook. And substances don't have the power to do that for us, but you keep going to the well thinking that they're going to.
Right. Well, they do in the short term, right? I mean, like there's a reason that people think that. And
Well,
because there certainly are physiological effects that we get from ingesting a substance, for example, right?
right,
Uh-huh.
right. The difference is like people that use recreationally different substances and they don't seem to have a problem with it, which is the vast majority of people that drink or use other substances. They may go to it and, as a just to relax, and it's something that they enjoy doing once in a while. When you kind of go to the point where you feel like the substance is an issue for you, it is your go-to thing for everything. It's the thing you feel like you need every single day to survive, to feel just a little bit happier, and that's the
Okay,
difference.
so it really starts to take on this outsized importance. It becomes the answer to all problems.
Yes, yes, that's what happens in addiction.
Okay, got it. So you don't frame addiction as a disease.
Correct.
Do you have and we're sort of honing in on what it actually is. Is that the answer? Is it something that you see as the solution to your problems even when you develop even when you know that it doesn't?
Yes, yes, it's you genuinely have you believe that it holds some benefits for you, even if it's just a temporary escape for just a little while. And a lot of times once you're using heavily continuously, it doesn't provide that for you at all, not even in the short term. So what happens is it's like any other habit that we develop. All habits can be broken. It's just changing your relationship with the substance. So if in terms of like with a person, it's almost like a codependent relationship with a substance, not a disease. There's not an imaginary line you cross where you don't have the power to stop. And that's what we take issue with. The loss of control has been debunked over and over again with all kinds of research. So people never actually lose control. You feel as if you need it, and that's why you keep going to it.
As you've just heard, all habits are breakable. Given the stress of the past year, maybe you've slipped into some less than optimal ones. If too much sugar, alcohol, weed, caffeine, or binge watching has become the new normal in your life, maybe it's time to change it up. White knuckling it with sheer willpower alone is super hard, especially when you're already stressed and overwhelmed. My wildly effective Healthy Habits course, Level Up Your Life, makes it way easier with smart strategy rooted in research, a proven holistic framework, and 3 opportunities for support directly from me over the course of your 6-month membership. And to encourage you to really put this train wreck of a year behind you, I'm putting Level Up on sale now through the end of the year. Start laying down the foundation for a life you'll love in 2021. Visit brodywelch.com to learn more about Level Up or to apply for a spot to work with me one-on-one in 2021. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. Now back to the show. Got it. And yes to what you said about just that the biological circuitry that is developed, right? That we have to be using more and more to get this at the same result, correct? Like that we habituate
There
to things, and so then it requires a higher dosage to elicit the same response that we might have gotten earlier.
Yes, yes, the tolerance builds. Some substances build a tolerance. Alcohol, benzodiazepines, opiates, a lot of times will build a tolerance. So, the same, 3 drinks maybe used to get you a little bit tipsy, and now it takes 5 drinks if you're drinking daily.
Does the same thing happen with behaviors like video games or shopping?
Um, I haven't seen that, and
Uh-huh.
I can't speak to that directly. I don't know that answer to that.
Yeah, just curious. I'm curious also as to what got you into this interested in this particular framework.
Well, I grew up in an AA household. My dad was a heavy, heavy drinker and drug user until I was about 9 years old. He got multiple DWIs, and in the 70s, they would just kind of bring you home. Well, this last time they ended up putting him in jail, and then he ended up in a detox unit. And he was mandated to go to treatment in AA, which he did, and he kind of jumped in with both feet. So I grew up being told that if I ever drank or drugged, I'd be an alcoholic, that it was hereditary, that he could tell by the way that I held my cocoa mug. And I mean, I was literally bred to be a problem substance user. And so in my early teens, I started experimenting. And by 18, I was pretty much a daily drinker. And I was using other drugs. And I used heavily for about just over 4 years, and then ended up going to AA because I was told that's what I would do. Now I got myself in a lot of trouble. I had an overdose. And during this time period, also, my grandfather passed away due to drinking. He died in DTs, which is withdrawal from alcohol. He'd been in and out of treatment in AA for about 35 to 40 years. He was a World War II veteran. And at that same time period, my dad was beginning to question the AA model himself as I was coming in. So this became a personal mission to me. I became part of his research without even knowing it. And I was hooked up with Mark Sheeran, who's one of the other co-developers of the program, way back when. That was 1989, 1990. And we decided we were going to figure out, build a better model. And figure out what addiction actually was and why the vast majority of people, especially young people that went to AA, didn't find a solution there.
And what did you find out?
Well, it's taken us. We started out trying to prove that AA worked. We wanted to see. We threw out the first step right away because we knew inherently that teaching people they were powerless and to accept a notion that they were powerless and that alcohol was powerful was probably would lead to bad results. It turns out the research shows that's true, that even the people that are successful in AA don't really have that belief system. If you find the ones that are most successful, they know that they have the power not to use it. So, but the people that take on that notion of powerlessness tend to have higher rates of binge usage. So we threw that out. And then systematically over about 15 years, Mark and my father lived with their guests at the retreat. They would take in people sometimes for almost nothing and really try to help them with the AA model. And they systematically threw out pretty much all of the 12 steps. And in even the part with the Christianity part of it, a lot of people will deny that, but AA is based on a Christian model. Now, I'm not knocking Christianity. I'm raised Catholic, but we really did find out that it not only was it not helpful to a lot of people that came to AA or that came to seek help, but that it could be actually more confusing and confounding for them to try and figure out what God's will was for them and things like that. So we systematically threw it all out, and that's when really the freedom model began to develop, when we realized if you tell people they have the power and ability to change their lives, the trajectory of their lives, if you tell them you were using because you were trying to find happiness, clearly it's not working that well for you because here you are, and that perhaps you can be happier making a change. And that was really the beginning of the freedom model.
I love what you said about earlier in the conversation that all habits can be broken. I firmly
Yeah.
believe that as well. But what is an essential piece of being able to break a habit and reestablish a new habit is the belief that you can, the belief that you have
Yeah.
that sort of self-authoring, that authority over your own life. And so it seems to me like a really logical place to start of taking issue with that you're powerless to change it. And I know many people who I deeply love and respect who are big believers in the AA model, but looking at the way that they move through the world,
Yes.
I would wonder whether they seem like very powerful people to me. They don't seem like people who buy into the powerlessness. And indeed, having coached many of them, I know that they see themselves as being capable of transformation. And so that idea of the fixed mindset of like, this is how I am and this is the way I'm going to be is very different than the growth mindset of that, hey,
Right.
if I start thinking differently and behaving differently, I can achieve a new result. So to me, that makes a lot of sense. What are
Yeah.
what are some of the other pieces of the freedom model? I'd love to know more about how it's different than what you call the treatment and recovery trap.
Yeah, well, we actually there's three distinct components to our book, and the first one really is debunking the disease model using all the research that's available right now, and showing people there's no loss of control. There's nothing inherently addictive about certain substances. Some can cause dependence, but that's different. That means your body gets acclimated to them, and when you stop, you'll go through a withdrawal phase. But that doesn't compel people to use. There was a long time in history when people just went through the withdrawal phase. They felt bad, and it never occurred to them that they should keep using. So there's we really debunk the idea that you're compelled to use, and that substances get a hold of you and hijack your brain, because they don't do that. So that's the first phase. The second phase is really about figuring out why, what are the reasons? There's no causes for addiction, but people have very personal reasons to them why they turn to substances. And so we help people to figure out exactly what they are. And then the third phase is addressing those issues and figuring out, how can I be happier? How can I achieve what I'm trying to get from substances in other ways in my life that are probably much more effective? And we want people to really open their mind. What happens with addiction, we see the opposite of addiction is diversification, because addiction is focusing on one thing, activity, substance, to the detriment of all else in your life. And so what we want to do is we want to help open people's worlds back up. People sometimes get stuck thinking there's only one, or this or that. Either I have to make this decision or that decision, when there's always infinite decisions, infinite solutions to any problem. And so we want to open people's worlds back up so that they can figure out, how can I be happier in my life? What do I feel I need to make the life that I really want? And what level of substance use fits into that? Because we don't necessarily take people and say, hey, that's it, you can never use substances again. We do strongly recommend a period of abstinence from the substance, so you can really figure out what you want. I had 20 years abstinent from alcohol to really know that I don't need alcohol for anything in my life. And so we do recommend that people do that with whatever substance they're using, and then, look to a future where they can be happy.
It's it's interesting that you're talking about diversification as the opposite of addiction, because really it seems like to me that's suggesting there's multiple paths to the same point, and if we really look at what we're trying to get from the substance or from the behavior, that we're able to that there's infinite possibilities of ways that we can meet the need for whatever it is, for a connection, for calm, for the ability
Yes.
to go to sleep, for the just escape, whatever people are trying to look for in their substance. That there's multiple ways of getting there, and it at the same time proving to yourself by taking away your go-to
Yeah.
forces you to make one of those other decisions.
It does. That's exactly what happened with me. Is I decided for that I would not drink or use any other substances for an extended period of time. I just took that off the table, because it was alcohol and drugs were my go-to thing. And then what happened with me is I needed my go-to thing every day, because life got harder and harder and harder for me the more that I used. So when I really was so unhappy that I knew I had to make a change, I just said, I'm taking these things off the table. I did go to AA for a short period of time, but I was really grateful that I was with a group of people that started this, that were like, okay, if you're at AA meetings, it's not for you to stay sober and drug free, because the odds are pretty good that won't help you to do that. And it didn't, because the only time I ever thought about getting drunk again was after a meeting. And I can remember saying that to my sponsor at the time. I'm like, these meetings do not seem helpful at all. And because they glamorize and glorify the substances, and make it seem very hard not to use them. And it wasn't hard for me, because I really wanted to figure out who I was, and how I could build a life that I could be proud of and happy about. And so you're right, it forced me to find other go-to things. I went back to exercise. I started yoga. I became a volunteer firefighter. I mean, I did all kinds of things that I never thought I would do.
I was just going to ask you what were the things that you did instead, and I love knowing that. In yoga and as well as in qigong, there's this idea that we feed what we focus on. That where we put our attention is where our energy follows. Right? It's kind of like, where are we shining our flashlight of awareness? And so
That's right.
that I can think about just, yeah, that notion of like, if every day you're listening to people talk about drugs and alcohol at a meeting, that it's logical that your brain would be thinking about drugs and alcohol every day. And
Yeah,
so that might, for some people, the community, the support, the like feeling like they're not alone, feeling like they have accountability and other humans who are walking the same difficult path, that can be a hugely important part of breaking a habit and kind of bringing people together, or having someone in your corner who believes that you can change, I think is often the supportive part. But it seems, yeah, just on its face, it seems like paying attention to the very thing that you're trying to avoid is perhaps counterproductive.
yeah. I mean, when you break up with someone, with a lover, you don't go hang out with them every day. and you
Yeah.
and if you're with a friend and you keep talking about him and talking about him, eventually, I know my friend was like, I think it's time we moved on.
Oh yeah, or like talking to my one of my kids when she was a teenager, that just thinking about like, wow, why are you giving these people so much power over you? Like
Yes.
that, just that middle school, like, oh, so and so said this thing, or that really, like, continuing to talk about it, continue to ruminate about it, amplifies its
It
effect on your
does.
life as
It
opposed to
does.
diminishing it. So yeah, it's I could see that as being really potent to focus on something else that will give you the same thing that you're looking for. And I'm curious about, in these 31 years that you've spent helping people, what surprised you along the way?
Well, two things, and they're kind of opposites. One thing is the majority of people that I've worked with have been the most amazing, creative, brilliant people that I've ever known. The people that have come through our retreat are are just so talented, and you look at their life and you think, how could this person think so badly of themselves? How could they get stuck in this lifestyle that is so detrimental to them? Because they're amazing people, and I guess the opposite of it is working with families. And I love working with families. I've been working with families this whole time as well, and I wrote the family book myself. It's the fact that families, on one hand, sometimes they just have such low regard for the person that's the addict. A lot of times, not I hate to say it, low regard, but they've developed such low expectations of their loved one, and that they kind of feed this low self-esteem that the person has. It gives the person a vote of no confidence when everybody around them makes excuses for them and is doing things for them, and is they just people will live up to your expectations of them. So those are the two things that were most surprising to me. Number one, people that have addiction are wonderful and amazing people, and their families tend to have the lowest regard of them, of anyone around them, which I do understand, but it is difficult to work with.
And so, yeah, it sounds like, yes, if someone has you pigeonholed as like irresponsible or manipulative, or
Yeah.
like, this person just doesn't have their shit together, that
Yeah,
there's
they're
that,
liars, they're
yeah,
manipulators. Yeah.
that it can be really hard for somebody to reject that if
Yeah.
that's being fed back to them. Do you advise people to take a break from their families, or to like be around people who don't think that way about them, or just how
Sometimes.
how can they overcome that being pigeonholed, or that, or helping, as they themselves, like if they've taken on that belief?
Yeah, it's sometimes we never tell people what to do. We help them to come to their own conclusions, and we really don't even take a tact of manipulating. Like, that's why we don't even. I come from a psychology background, and I know a lot of therapists. Will tell people we're not doing therapy, because therapy in a sense is designed to manipulate you to think a certain way that would be more productive. Instead, we really take a tact of teaching and kind of guiding people through the program and the curriculum so that they get a really good understanding of what's going on. And a lot of times they'll come to their own conclusions. I just worked with somebody who just left, who came to the conclusion. She's like, I think because she's almost 28 years old, lives above her mom, and she has two kids. And, she goes, I really think I need to get my own place. She's like, I love my mom, but our relationship has gotten very volatile. And I really think to move forward, I'll be happier living on my own, maybe not far away, but maybe in the next county or something, half hour away. And she came to that on her own. And I thought it was a pretty astute observation.
When you are working with people, is there a common first step that you have people take, or maybe even someone listening, something that they might be able to implement as a first step in looking at changing their behavior with a substance?
Well, Mark does specifically in developing the binge construct, which is we really have an initial conversation with someone to figure out what is the habit. Because everybody's is really different. I mean, some people are daily heavy users, but a lot of people are not. They go on binges, and we want to see the progression of how a binge starts and what they're thinking when they go on this binge, so that we can get a good idea of what their reasons are, what values they see in the substance.
Got it. So starting with how they're viewing it.
Yes, yes. What is their love affair? What is
Okay.
their love affair
Yes.
with this
And
substance?
as I think about some of the people that I'm working with, food addiction is something that is super common, that or like people identify as like if that, especially people who feel like they've quit everything else, but food is kind
Oh,
of
yeah.
the thing that they can't get away from, in the same way that you can make sure that you don't have alcohol or drugs in your home. It's pretty hard to avoid food. And yet when people, even when they're aware of their triggers, they're aware of what's going on there, but they feel like they they don't have the willpower, and they end up feeling like there's something wrong with them, or that they're like somehow morally flawed for indulging in or binging on food, for example. Any
Yeah.
advice for those folks?
Well, it's an interesting thing that you bring that up, because I remember saying, because I quit drugs first, then I quit alcohol, and then I got into the meetings and I started smoking heavily, which I'd never done before because I was always an athlete. I quit smoking, and then I was left with I had a couple kids. My kids were young, and I found myself binging on food. And really, I remember saying to someone, there's got to be a way that people learn to moderate, because you can't give up food.
Yes.
And yeah, so I dabbled with a couple different things. I went to Weight Watchers. I didn't like the meeting structure. I'd already left AA meetings, and I'm just not comfortable in that setting. But I did learn a lot about nutrition. And as I was doing my research for the Freedom Model, I really learned that food is much the same way. You can do a binge construct. You can think, okay, what do you think you're getting from whatever food it is that you like to binge on? I mean, for me, it was at the time, it was sweets and potatoes. I love French fries, and it would make me terribly ill. And I thought, what do you? It's a very similar to binging on drugs or alcohol. What did I think I was getting? Was it comforting me? And maybe it was in the moment. But I just really learned that food definitely doesn't have the power to make me feel better. And if anything, binging on food made me feel a whole lot worse. And now my go-to thing, because we all have to have a go-to thing. My go-to thing is walking. I'm kind of like Forrest Gump. I'll go out if I'm really faced with a dilemma, I will walk 3-4 miles to try and sort things out. So it's a lot of the same things. It's figuring out what you think you're getting from it, and also not beating yourself up.
Oh, isn't that so important? I mean, because then we're in the shame spiral that makes us
Cycle.
reach out for the very comfort that we're probably trying to get from the substance.
I can remember somebody bringing in cupcakes to work, and this is probably 20 years ago. And somebody brought in cupcakes, and I remember having a cup. Had sworn off sweets and I've learned not to swear off anything anymore, but I sworn off sweets, and I had a cupcake, and I felt so bad. I went back for a second cupcake, and I stopped myself, and I'm like, this is the most absurd thing.
If one cupcake made me feel bad, two is going to make me feel better.
Right. I'm like, well, I already had one. I might as well just go off completely. And I thought,
yeah, the what the hell effect. That happens all the time. And when people are working on healthy habits, and as a coach, helping people identify what could work as a substitute and creating more space between the trigger and the response. I love the going for a walk thing. I mean, like, first of all, that takes you to safety, takes you away from
it sure does.
The kitchen or the substance or whatever it is. And it allows you to change your emotional state. And it allows you to just breaking that. The more space that we can put between a cue and a behavior, the more conscious we are able to be in our choices.
That's right. That's exactly right. It's and you just have to do it long enough to where now it's second nature for me to go for a walk and not to reach for a sweet or something like that, because and a lot of times people that quit alcohol will turn to sweets because of the sugars, because it's a sugar. There's also a sugar thing there. Alcohol is just sugar. So what I do is I am a visual person. So I'll literally envision a table, and I'll be like, I'm taking this off the table. This is not an option for me right now.
That's great. That's great. Getting back to the family issue, we talked about families being part of the problem sometimes, but I'm sure a lot of our listeners have families and know people with an issue of a dependency or addiction, and they want to be a helpful family member. Do you have any advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, it's you look at the person, know that they're not broken, know that they're not, and it's not as cut and dry. A lot of people are like, oh, so they're choosing drugs over the relationship. No, it's not that cut and dry either. They want both. Really look at the problem. What I do with a lot of family members is I'll take them through their own personal history and say, wasn't there a time when you tried to turn to something for comfort that really couldn't do that for you? And do you remember what that was like? This is what we're talking about here. This person is not sick. They're not broken. They're not fragile. So you can be honest with them, have normal expectations for them, and then hold them to those those expectations for their behaviors. But at the same time, maybe, offer them, hey, I found this different model, because a lot of families now, their loved ones won't go to AA, they won't go to treatment. I found this different model. There's a free book. Maybe you can check it out with me. And that's what I have. And also I recommend that the family members, if they're really struggling, my book for the family really does talk about guilt and shame and how to approach someone and how to be supportive when when they've finished a program or when they're trying to make a change, because most people make a change on their own and they don't go to treatment at all, and how to be supportive when that happens.
Great. That sounds like a really useful resource. Do you have any statistics about your success rates or anything that that could inspire confidence in people recommending your program to a loved one?
Yes, we have a complete abstinence rate, long-term abstinence rate of 62.5%. That's for people that have come through our retreat. That was a 20-year longitudinal study. There were 3 separate surveys that were done by independent researchers. We did all the surveys the first 12 years, and then we had 3 separate independent researchers do them in 2002, 2006, and 2008. And, it was, we had to pay these independent researchers whether they came out with good stats or not. And we were happily surprised that the abstinence rates were so high. And in the last study, we broke it down because we were starting to analyze moderation rates, like people that were, that maybe had come through for heroin and then went, decided once in a while they use alcohol. In our surveys, they would be considered in the drunk category, not in the abstinent category. But we did find out that about half of the 38% of people that came through that were in the using category, about half of them were successfully moderating their substance use, usually alcohol, to non-problematic levels.
That's really impressive. And especially because you have it done by third-party researchers. I think that really says a lot about that you're not just playing it up. And
right.
I understand that you have a free resource for people.
Yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about what that is and where they can get a hold of it?
We have 2 free ebooks that are short, and they are at thefreedommodel.org/ebooks. And then we also are offering right through the end of the year. We started offering this because of the pandemic, because we knew people were locked up at home. And we're going to keep it going through the end of the year, where you can get our full program books, both the Freedom Model for Addictions and the Freedom Model for the Family, digitally on our website at thefreedommodel.org/products. And you enter Freedom 100 at checkout for either of those books, or you can get the bundle. And you can download them for free.
Awesome. I'll make sure to have links to that in the show notes for folks. Michelle, do you have any other last words of wisdom before we close today?
I just want everybody to know that they're not, even if you come from 2 addicted parents, if you've been struggling, no matter how far down you've gone the addiction road, you can change. I watched a man who had been on methadone, for 20 years. He was back and forth. He had Hep C. He ended up dying of liver failure. And by the time he came to us, he knew his time was short. He changed his life. He got 3 years with his family, reconciled with them. I've seen amazing stories of people come back from the brink and change their lives and really find happiness. And I want everybody to know that they can do that.
It's really never too late, people. It's really, really a great reminder. Michelle Dunbar, thank you so much for being such an inspiring and wonderful guest today on A Healthy Curiosity.
Thank you so much, Brody. It was my pleasure.
Thanks for listening today. To check out the show notes, get on my email list, or drop me a line, head to brodywelch.com. That's Brody with an IE and Welch with a CH. I'd love to hear from you. If you learned something new or feel inspired to try something different in your life, I'd love for you to pay it forward by sharing this episode with a friend who you think could also benefit, and give them a reason to listen. You'll be helping to create a world where we encourage each other to embody self-respect. Till next time, be good to yourself.